We're continuing with our host agency mini series. And today I want to talk to you about the questions that you need to be asking when you're first choosing your host agency. Now, these are the questions you can ask when you are looking for your first host agency, but also really good questions to ask if you're switching host agencies. Now, something I want to be really, really clear about is that a lot of times they use terms like fill out an application, check the application, we're hiring, all of these different sorts of things. If you're an independent contractor, it's really, really, really important to understand, as much as they may want to interview you, you need to interview them. You are, in fact, entering into a partner type agreement. Now, I also want to be really clear because this is something that came up in some of the questions through social media and other such when I was asking, what do you want in a host agency? What do you need? And this, that, the other. And I had more than one that said, I want more of a partnership relationship. I want them to be really invested in my business. And I'm going to be really clear in that your host agency is your partner, not a part of a partnership. And there is a difference. Maybe a better way of terming it is that they're a key stakeholder, just like you're going to be in a relationship, that you're going to have partner suppliers, you're going to have a partner with your host agency. It does not mean that they have a vested interest in your business. It does not mean that you are in business together. It is really, really, really important to see that distinction and that differentiation. And I get it. It can be really confusing, particularly in the event that you're coming from an employee-based position in some other industry, some other part of the world, or perhaps even within the travel industry itself. When you are working with a host agency and you are an independent contractor, you are the business owner. And I want it to be really, really clear for you that you are, in fact, the business owner, and you are the one that should be driving all of the conversation, should be driving all of the business decisions. So, here are some questions. I'm actually going to link up in the show notes. I'm going to work on a Google Doc and I'm going to add some questions. And the reason why we're going to do it as a Google Doc as opposed to an actual opt-in is I want to be able to have the opportunity to add questions. So if you're listening to this and you've looked at the Google Doc and you think, man, this question should have been on there, or I wish I would have asked this, send me a DM over on Instagram, go to Art of Selling Travel, find me over there, send me a DM or come join us in our free Facebook group, add it there. Let me know what questions should be on there. And I am more than happy to keep this as what I'm going to call a live document, which means that we can continue to add to it as time goes on, because I think it's really important that we make these as readily available as possible. So let's get into this. And this is not in any particular order, if you will. It's just kind of as they came to me, as I thought of things. So first and foremost, which preferred suppliers do you work with? And is there an availability to work beyond those preferreds? So if you're brand new, you may not have a clue what you want to do in terms of preferred suppliers. That might not mean anything to you. However, I also want you to take some time and think about what kind of business do you really want to get into. Perhaps you got into selling travel because you love to go to Disney all the time. So you're like, I'm going to help families do Disney all the time. That's a very good possibility that that's where you want to be. I also want you to look at what other things interest you, what other things are out there. And in fact, I would even encourage you to maybe go into some of the different Facebook groups, come into our Facebook group and ask, who are your favorite preferred suppliers and why? What are your favorite types of things to sell? Really get a feel for it. Now, what you start with as your preferreds does not necessarily end with what your preferreds are. And again, that's why I think it's so important. Go back, listen to the last episode of all the things you need to have in place, because you may have started in one place in your business, but as you evolve as a human, as a travel advisor, as a travel professional, your life evolves and shifts and changes. So it's very possible that what you started with is no longer where you want to continue with your business. And that's okay. In fact, that's even encouraged. What it does mean is that you need to have the infrastructure in place to be able to switch if the current host that you're with is not in alignment with where you're headed. So, is there an availability to work with suppliers beyond the preferreds? Some companies have a list of preferreds, they have a list of non-preferreds, and then they have a list of do not sells. So it's important to know, is there more than just the preferred? What if They only work with company ABCD, and you want to work with company GEF. And so, what does that look like? So, is there possibilities to do that? What does that look like? What would need to happen? Is it even a possibility? Because the other thing I'm going to say, particularly if you're switching from one host to another, if a specific company is not on their roster at all, that's a big red flag. I remember when I was leaving the franchise that I was a part of, and I was looking at different consortia. The different consortiums have different preferred suppliers, and therefore they have different relationships and different commission levels and different this, that, the other through that consortia. Some of them, I was not at all in alignment with what their key preferred suppliers were versus what I preferred to sell. And so while as an agency owner from top to bottom, it was my own IATA, it was my own credentials, my own everything, I was more than welcome to work with whoever I wanted. However, I wanted to have that buying power, that negotiating power of the consortia. So I wanted to make sure that their list of preferreds was at least 90-95% in alignment with my top 10 suppliers. Because if that's where the bulk of my business is coming from, then I want to make sure that I'm also going to receive top dollar from them as well. So that's a really important one. Is there a minimum production requirement? Do you need to sell a certain amount in order to stay active, in order for your agency to remain viable in their eyes? Now, I'm going to say that for the most part, if you're not selling on a consistent basis, then you just have a hobby. You don't have a business. And the reality is there's a whole other conversation to be had when it comes to that. But it's important to know, is there minimum productions? And in particular, is there minimum productions of specific suppliers? Because there are some hosts out there, pardon me, that require that you have to do a minimum amount of dollars with certain suppliers each year. That's not typically the norm. But again, it's these one-offs that you need to be aware of. It's these one-offs, these not typically the norms. It's all of these other sorts of things that you need to be thinking of. So what tech tools are included? Is the CRM, the booking tools, marketing tools, what do they have that's actually included? Or are those things going to be additional? Do I own my email list and marketing content? That one's an important one too. My son was a realtor for a real estate company, and all realtors up here, at least in Canada, are independent. They are not paid salaries. They are independent and this, that, the other. And when he left the first brokerage he was with, they retained the right to all of his socials. That was a big one because some of his socials were his prior to joining. He just converted them into business and they retained ownership of that. You need to know, what do you own, have complete ownership of? What do they have ownership of? And if it's not explicitly written in the contract, you need to make sure that it's clear. What happens to my client data when I leave? That's a really important one. So maybe they say, oh, yes, you own your client information. Okay, great. So what happens to the client information that's inside of your software when I leave? How do I know that you are not, or anybody from your company is not going to reach out to them? I was actually working with an energy provider when I had the brick and mortar agency. I was working with an energy provider who, sold me my electricity and power and et cetera, et cetera. And they were what they call an energy marketer. So while they are entirely their own company, they sell under the umbrella of another company. Well, it turns out somebody under the umbrella of that company decided to open up a new one, and they sent out an email to me. Obviously, I no longer had the commercial building anymore. So that address was no longer associated with any billing or other such, because we weren't, didn't have that particular email, wasn't associated with power at a building. And it was like 6 years later that they emailed me and tried to bring me into their company. So a couple things. One, under Canadian laws, he doesn't have the right to email me that late after because I haven't been a client. And two, it was a different energy marketer under the same umbrella company. So what happens to your client data? Because when I reached out to my to the company that I do work with and let them know, things were rolling because that was a breach on so many levels. So what happens to your client data when you leave? What's their belief around fees? And I am using specifically the word belief because when they have a policy that you cannot charge fees, or a policy that you must charge fees, or a policy that your fees are X amount, that's not independent. I will also say when they have a policy that you cannot charge fees, that's a really big red flag. And the reason for that is one, I am always going to be pro fee. There are so many reasons. We have other podcasts on that, and I'm probably going to do another one coming up soon on why it's so important that fees are a part of the conversation. But the other thing is what happens if the key suppliers, let's just say, the one with the most, let's just say they decide to go all AI, which I read a recent article about, and they decide, you know what, we don't have to pay travel agents anymore. So we're just not going to. You have two options. One, you close up and you go away. Or two, you continue to sell what you love on a fee-based system. Now, the reality is there's always a possibility that things are going to get canceled, this is going to happen, or this, that, the other, and commission's not going to get paid out. Fees help alleviate that. The other thing is fees allow you to choose things that maybe aren't as commissionable, or there are certain products, again, with the guy with the mouse, not all of the other accessory items that you're going to add into that trip are commissionable, in which case you are doing a lot of work for free. And yet there's a lot of mouse-based travel agencies that have very strong anti-fee policies. Now, I believe some of it can be earmarked factor. There is things that go along with that. And so in which case, you also have to weigh the pros and cons of certain designations, certain things that are a factor with that. But I'm also going to say when they have a no fee policy, it is a red flag. What's the commission split? Does it change based on production? Now, that one's a really important conversation. Again, if you are brand new and you are new to this whole conversation, when you hear an 80-20 split, or that you're going to make 80% commission or 85 or 90 or 95 or whatever it is, I need you to know that's your percentage of the commission. I once had a conversation with a travel agent who was coming through the MLM world and was promised that they were going to get that level of commission off the trip. So if it was $1,000 trip, she was making 90% of the commission. So she was going to get $900. That is not how it happens. I just want to be really, really clear because I know that there are some out there, particularly in more of that MLM world, that have it confused. So let me be abundantly clear. Your 90% commission is based on anywhere from 5 to 20% of the commissionable part of the product. The fees get removed out of that, non-commissionable fares get removed out of that, taxes, all sorts of things come out of that. And then it's what's left over after that. When and how do I get paid? Is it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? And is it only after travel or after the trip's paid in full? Where is it that comes out? One, you need to know how frequently they're issuing checks. If they are issuing it on the weekly, what day of the week, so that you know what to watch for. Are there any fees beyond monthly or annual? For example, is there tech fees? Is there marketing fees? Are you having to pay additional to have them market on your behalf? Is there transaction fees? If in the event of a chargeback, is there chargeback fees? Now, if you're not familiar with a chargeback, that's where a client says, I didn't buy that. That's not me. So again, this is why you have to be so incredibly careful with the frauds and other such. That can be a whole other conversation too. And for example, if somebody were to do a chargeback on one of my programs, not only does the refund kick in, then the system also charges me an additional fee for having triggered a chargeback. Now, obviously, all of our programs are non-refundable, and that's in the terms and conditions and whatnot. So we usually get the money back. However, for having triggered a chargeback, there is a fee involved in that. So what happens to the commission if I leave mid-booking? So let's say you've made the booking, you got halfway through it, deposits are in, everything else, but you're leaving to go to another host agency. What happens then? It's really important to understand that particular scenario. There are some host agencies who say, so too bad, so bad, like so sad, too bad, and they keep it all. You need to know what that is and know what the rules around that are. It needs to be explicitly written in the contract what that looks like in the event of an exit. If you're in a position where you don't have a non-compete and therefore can be under two host agencies, it might mean that you have to continue paying the monthly fees until all of your commissions are paid out. And that's just simply what you do. So if I leave, can I take my clients with me without restriction? Is there a non-compete clause or non-solicit? Those are really important things that are in there. Again, never, ever, ever, ever sign the contract without reading it in depth, in detail. What does onboarding look like? Now, I want you to have them to be as specific as possible. So can you tell me, what does onboarding look like? Let's say I go ahead, I sign the contract. What's the next step? And then what do we do after that? Can you tell me week by week, how am I going to get to know this? Particularly if you are brand new. Week by week, what does this look like from this week to next week to the week afterwards? What does that look like? This is a really good one too. Who do I call when I'm stuck with a client issue? And better yet, who do I call if that issue is after hours? Because a lot of independent travel advisors aren't necessarily working the Monday to Friday, 9 till 5. And especially when you're talking about national, maybe you're on the West Coast and your host agency's on the East Coast. There is a 3-ish hour difference. So when they clock out at 5 p.m., it's only 2 p.m. where you are. Or heck, if you're in Hawaii, what is that? It's probably only like noon or 11 a.m. So who's going to be there to help you? What does that look like? Is training included or is it an additional cost? What is included? Be very specific. Are they just connecting you with supplier webinars, or are they actually going to show you how to build a business? And in the event you have to submit a support ticket, what is the average response time? How long can you anticipate it's going to take before you know what the answer is, before you're going to get some assistance on it? Okay, so let's talk about the touchy questions. This is where things get, I'm not even going to say mildly uncomfortable. They're going to get real uncomfortable. And yet these are such important questions. Is the host agency profitable? Because there is nothing worse than doing all the work only to get jacked around in getting your commissions. And then you start going, do they even have the money to pay me? And if the company's not profitable, they can't afford to pay you. Sure, they can probably play the shell game for a while, slide this, that, but ultimately something's going to go off the track somewheres, and there's going to be a problem. How long have you been in business, and who specifically owns the business? What's your advisor turnover rate? You know, if they're turning over advisors, like the average advisor only lasts 9 months or 12 months or 2 years even, there's possibly something in there that you need to know more. Can I speak with 3 current advisors? And I don't mean like the ones you've chosen to give me, but that I could just go on your website. Do you have a problem if I reach out to anybody on your website? What happens to the advisors and their bookings if the agency closes? And I get it. And I want to be really, really clear. This is not about making host agencies out to be the bad guy. It is just simply a matter of business. In fact, recently here, what was it, like November of 25, there was a specific earmarked agency that had a falling out with the mouse, and it ended up leading to massive disruptions. So there was advisors that got left not getting their commissions, files being left hung up in the lurch, all of these different sorts of things. There was a lot that went on. I know my Facebook groups that I was in lit right up with advisors talking about it and this, that, the other. You need to know what's going to happen in the event of an agency closure. What happens, particularly if you're with a smaller one, what happens in the event of the death of the owner? What is the succession plan in place? When I owned my franchise, there was another franchisee that was about an hour's drive from me. But as the crow flies, I was one of the closest in terms of rural factor to this agency. And the owner, unfortunately, was killed very unexpectedly, very tragically, all of these different sorts of things. And their son stepped in and had zero experience, in fact, drained the bank accounts. This was all happening in winter, to the point that the staff were working with no heat in an Alberta winter, trying to make sure that the clients were looked after. Another agency was involved trying to help facilitate, like the head office came in, like it was a whole thing. But because of my proximity, I was getting the angry complaints. I was getting the angry phone calls because I had a similar brand, which again is why brand is not always all it's cracked up to be. But it's a matter of what is their succession plan, particularly with the smaller ones. Because if they do not have a succession plan in place, things can go sideways really fast. And in this particular case, it was actual employees. It was not independent contractors. It was actual employees that were left holding the bag and having to deal with things. So, getting back to kind of the general one, who's responsible for finding clients? This is something that a lot of times host agencies will say, we have this amazing lead system. We're going to get you so many leads, this, that, the other. Ask, what does that look like? What's their marketing, their SEO? What's their practice, their strategy? What does that look like in reality? Because a lot of people will use a lot of really big, fancy terms and words and other such. But the reality is they really don't have one. They just post on Facebook. They have a website. They don't do anything with it. They don't update it often. In fact, I have done so much digging on host agency websites in the last little while. I can tell you there's a lot of agency websites that either haven't been updated since 2007 or somehow thought a 2007 looking website was the right way. But there's so many ways that you can protect yourself. And this is not about host agencies being villains, because I am still a huge proponent that unless you are working exclusively with DMCs or you are well over $1 million a year in sales, a host agency is going to be the fastest way for you to be able to get to the best commissions, access to better supplier support, and all of these other things. Host agencies are not the villain. Being a passive business owner is, or another way of saying it is by treating your business like you're an employee. You are a business owner. You need to step into that role, step into that position. So before we wrap up, 5 ways to protect your business. Get your own branding. It was recently pointed out to me that, again, for those earmarked agencies, there may be some difficulties with that. That there can be some fine print on that. Again, it all depends on a few things like that. There could be some legalities to it. If you're not a full-time only selling the ear products, that might not be your best choice of host agency. Own your email. Own your email list. Own your email itself. You want to be able to communicate with your clients without disruption, no matter what agency you're at. Keep your own records. You are in business. You need to have an independent, separate place of recording all of your transactions, knowing what commission is outstanding, knowing what commission is coming, knowing what files are due, all of these sorts of things. You need to have an independent record of it, because in the event at any point the host agency shuts you out, do you still have access to be able to understand how to contact your client, know where to find them, know what's going on, have access to all of this? Because if you are leaving everything inside of their systems, inside of their software, and you are independent, you, my friend, are not independent. You are an unpaid employee. Read your contract. Read your contract with a professional. Get somebody who understands contracts. Get an attorney, get a lawyer, get somebody who knows what they're doing. These contracts can be worth thousands and thousands of dollars if you don't understand them. And build your own supplier relationships. Those supplier relationships are going to exceed beyond the host agency you're with. They're going to travel beyond the supplier that that particular business development manager is with. Build the relationships with them, because anytime you can deal with things at a smaller level, that's great. Obviously, host agencies are going to be able to have a little bit more juice in order to be able to go to bat for you in the event something goes sideways. But you also want to make sure that the host agent, or that your relationship with the supplier, so that when they see it come through, they're like, oh, I know Sally. She's fabulous. Okay, no, Sally's having a problem, then there must definitely be a problem, because I've seen how much Sally's selling. And therefore, if she's got an issue, let's get it looked at. Host agencies are a fabulous partner in your business. They are, however, you are not part of a partnership. They do not own your business. They do not own what's happening. They do not have the right to tell you how to run your business. You are an independent contractor, which means you are a business owner. It is up to you to step into that, to work within that, and to build the business you want. Trust is earned over time. A good host welcomes hard questions. If asking about their financials or contracts or leadership or anything like that makes them defensive, that's your answer. Trust your gut. When you go into business, there is nothing more powerful than what your own personal gut tells you. If when you are in the midst of it, you're like, something's not right, listen to it. Do not gaslight yourself into saying, oh, well, what do you know? Your gut knows more than you realize. Your gut will tell you, but you've got to be paying attention in order to hear it. And with that, make sure you check out the Google Doc in the show notes. And until next time, happy selling.